I'm Amelia Harrison, 34. And I never thought I'd be calmly sipping champagne while watching my husband's world collapse around him. 2 months ago, during our anniversary dinner at Le Ciel, his ex-girlfriend Stephanie appeared, placing a positive pregnancy test beside his plate and announcing, "Congratulations, Daddy." The look they exchanged told me everything. While other women might have caused a scene, I simply smiled, excused myself, and formulated a plan that would unravel 15 years of his carefully constructed lies. Revenge, like the finest wine, is best served with patience, and I had all the evidence I needed. Before I dive into how I dismantled my husband's perfect life piece by piece, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've ever had that gut-wrenching moment when you realized someone you trusted completely had betrayed you, hit that like button. Subscribe to see more stories about how karma eventually comes for those who deserve it. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. James Mitchell walked into my Economics 101 class 15 years ago, and I was instantly drawn to him. Tall, confident, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through you, he was everything I wasn't. While I came from a modest background in Western Massachusetts with parents who worked multiple jobs to put me through college, James was Boston aristocracy. His family owned Mitchell Investments, one of the most prestigious firms in New England, managing billions in assets for the elite. "You're different from the other girls," he told me on our third date. I believed him. I thought our differences complemented each other. My practical, grounded nature, balancing his ambitious drive. I was studying finance with dreams of making something of myself. He was following the path laid out for him since birth. We were the perfect match, or so everyone said. After graduation, James joined his family's firm while I landed an entry-level position at a competing company. For the first few years, we built our careers side by side. I was making a name for myself, earning promotions faster than my peers. But when James proposed after 4 years together, things started to shift subtly. "The firm needs me to travel more," he'd explain. "Having both of us working such demanding jobs isn't sustainable for building a family." At first, the comments were casual, almost thoughtful. Then came the suggestions that my firm's values didn't align with our future plans. The questions about whether I really wanted to juggle it all when we had children. By our second year of marriage, I had resigned from my promising career to support James properly, as his mother Eleanor had put it. Eleanor Mitchell was the perfect society wife, impeccably dressed, socially connected, and utterly devoted to maintaining the family's position. From the moment I joined the family, she made it clear what was expected. "The Mitchell name comes with responsibilities, Amelia," she would remind me during our weekly lunches. "James needs a partner who understands his world." What she meant was, James needs someone who won't challenge him. Our townhouse in Beacon Hill became my beautiful prison. I planned charity galas, hosted dinner parties for James's clients, and became the ideal corporate wife. My Harvard degree gathered dust while I learned to distinguish between Limoges and Wedgwood china. When we weren't hosting, James worked late. The late nights turned into business trips: Tokyo, London, Singapore. I decorated our home, maintained my figure, and waited. 3 years into our marriage, we started trying for a baby. Month after month, I endured negative pregnancy tests. After a year, we consulted specialists. The doctors found nothing wrong with either of us, diagnosing us with unexplained infertility. We began IVF treatments, the hormones, the daily injections, the emotional roller coaster of hope and disappointment. Through 3 failed rounds, James was increasingly distant. "Maybe it's not meant to be," he would say, checking his phone as I cried after another failed transfer. The pressure from his family mounted with each passing year. Eleanor would send me articles about diet changes to improve fertility. At family gatherings, James's cousins paraded their children around while giving me sympathetic looks. James's father, Robert, the only Mitchell who showed me genuine kindness, tried to shield me from their comments. "Don't let them get to you," he'd whisper. "There's more to life than meeting Eleanor's expectations." I didn't know then that Robert had his own reasons for distrusting his son and wife. By our 8th anniversary, we had been through 5 rounds of IVF. I had endured countless hormone injections, procedures, and the emotional devastation of 2 early miscarriages. Each loss hollowed me out a little more, while James seemed increasingly detached. He suggested we take a break from fertility treatments. I agreed, emotionally exhausted. That's when the late nights became more frequent. The business trips multiplied. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume sometimes lingered on his shirts. I tried to dismiss my suspicions. Surely James wouldn't betray me while I was at my most vulnerable? Whenever I tried to discuss my concerns, he would dismiss them as fertility, hormone paranoia, or understandable insecurity. 2 months before our fateful anniversary dinner, James suggested adoption. We could give a child a home, he said, not looking up from his phone. It might be our best option. I wanted one more try at IVF, one last chance at having our biological child. He reluctantly agreed, scheduling our anniversary dinner at Lucille, Boston's most exclusive restaurant, as a peace offering. I thought it was a sign that things were improving between us. I believed we were finally back on the same page. We'll face this together, he promised as he booked the reservation 3 months in advance. Whatever happens. I spent hours preparing for that dinner, choosing the perfect black dress, styling my hair, applying makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes from years of fertility, medication, and disappointment. When James commented on how beautiful I looked that evening, I felt a flicker of hope that we might recapture what we once had. I had no idea that dinner would be the beginning of the end of our marriage, not because of what was about to happen, but because of what I would discover had been happening all along. Lucille occupied the top floor of Boston's tallest skyscraper, with panoramic views of the harbor. The restaurant's reputation for exclusivity was legendary. Reservations required months in advance, and even then, only for those with the right connections or last name. The Mitchell name, naturally, opened all doors. James had requested the corner table with the best view of the city. A bottle of Dom Perignon was already chilling when we arrived, and the maitre d' greeted us by name. On any other night, I would have reveled in the luxury, but something felt off about James. He checked his watch repeatedly, seemed distracted during our appetizer, and kept glancing toward the elevator. "Is everything okay?" I asked after he checked his phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Just a potential issue at work," he assured me, slipping the phone back into his jacket pocket. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." He proposed a toast to new beginnings, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I should have recognized it as foreshadowing. We were halfway through our main course sea bass for me, filet mignon for him when the elevator doors opened, and I saw her. Even from across the restaurant, I could feel the energy shift. Tall, blonde, designer dress, Stephanie Clark walked purposefully toward our table, ignoring the maitre d' who tried to intercept her. I recognized her immediately from old photos in James's college yearbook. Stephanie had been his girlfriend throughout most of college until they broke up senior year, supposedly because she wanted to pursue a career in New York while he was committed to Boston. I had always found it strange how he clammed up whenever she was mentioned. "Sorry to interrupt your dinner," she said, her voice steady as she approached our table. She didn't look at me at all. Her eyes were fixed on James, whose face had drained of color. Before either of us could respond, she placed something on the table beside his plate, a plastic stick with a small window showing 2 pink lines. "A positive pregnancy test. Congratulations, Daddy," she said, the slight tremor in her voice the only indication that this wasn't a rehearsed scene. "I thought you might want to know before I start showing." The restaurant seemed to fall silent, though I'm sure it was just the blood rushing in my ears. I watched James's expression morph from shock to panic to something resembling resignation. The look they exchanged told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a delusional ex or a mistake. This was planned. Or at least, not unexpected. "Stephanie," James finally managed. "This isn't the place. When would be a good time, James?" She cut him off. "After you ghost me for another week? Or after I've had the baby you said you wanted?" I sat perfectly still, observing the scene as if watching actors in a play. A strange calm settled over me as puzzle pieces clicked into place: the late nights, the distant behavior, the sudden interest in adoption. James reached for my hand across the table, but I subtly pulled away. "Amelia, I can explain," he began, but I stood up, placing my napkin beside my half-eaten dinner. "I need a moment," I said quietly. surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. You two clearly have things to discuss. I walked to the restroom without looking back, locked myself in a stall, and took several deep breaths. The woman I saw reflected in the mirror when I emerged looked remarkably composed for someone whose life had just imploded. I applied fresh lipstick, adjusted my dress, and returned to find James alone at our table, head in his hands. "Where's Stephanie?" I asked, sitting down as if nothing had happened. "She left." "Amelia, it's not what you think." "What do I think, James?" I took a sip of my wine, maintaining eye contact. "It was one mistake," he insisted. "A moment of weakness during that conference in Chicago 3 months ago. I was going to tell you." "Were you?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. "When exactly were you planning to mention this?" He fumbled with his watch, a nervous habit I'd observed countless times during business negotiations. "I didn't know she was pregnant." "I swear." I nodded, not believing a word. "Let's go home." This isn't a conversation for a public restaurant. The car ride home was silent. James attempted several explanations, each one contradicting the last. By the time we reached our townhouse, he had settled on a narrative, a one-night stand, a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness during a difficult time in our marriage. I went through the motions, hanging up my coat, removing my jewelry, washing my face while my mind calculated and planned. When James followed me into our bedroom, his expression had changed from panic to something resembling hope. "Amelia," he said cautiously, "I know this is terrible timing, but maybe this could be a solution for us." I stared at him, genuinely confused. "The baby," he clarified. "We've been trying for so long. Stephanie isn't ready to be a mother. She's focused on her career. But we could raise the child, give it the family and stability it deserves." The audacity of his suggestion momentarily stole my breath. He wasn't just confessing an affair, he was proposing we raise his love child as our own, presenting his betrayal as a gift. "You want me to raise your mistress's baby?" I asked, needing to hear him say it out loud. "Our baby," he corrected. "It could be our family, Amelia. The family we've been trying to build." I sat on the edge of our bed, considering my response carefully. If I reacted with the rage boiling beneath my surface, I would lose my advantage. James needed to believe he could manipulate me as he always had. "I need time," I finally said. "This is a lot to process." Relief washed over his face. He thought I was considering it. "Of course," he said, reaching for my hand. "Take all the time you need. I love you, Amelia. We can get through this together." That night, after James fell asleep, I began my investigation. I carefully searched his wallet, finding receipts from hotels I didn't recognize and restaurants we'd never visited together. I checked his passport, noting entry stamps for countries he'd never mentioned visiting. I photographed everything with my phone before returning each item exactly as I'd found it. While examining his desk, I discovered a hidden compartment containing a second phone. The messages confirmed my suspicions Stephanie wasn't a one-time mistake. Their affair had been ongoing for years, predating even our fertility struggles. And Stephanie wasn't the only one. Names I didn't recognize appeared in messages spanning back 3 years. By dawn, I had compiled enough evidence to confirm James had been systematically unfaithful throughout most of our marriage. But something told me this was just the tip of the iceberg. If he could maintain these deceptions so effectively, what else was he hiding? As I slipped back into bed beside my sleeping husband, I made a decision. I would not confront him with what I knew, not yet. First, I would discover exactly who James Mitchell really was, and then I would ensure he lost everything he valued, just as he had stolen years of my life with his lies. The morning after the disaster at Lucille, I called in a favor from Rachel Donovan, my college roommate who had become a private investigator. We met at a cafe in Cambridge, far from James's usual haunts. "Jesus, Amelia," Rachel said after I explained the situation. "I always thought James was too perfect to be true, but this is soap opera level stuff. I need to know everything," I told her. "Not just the affairs, I want to know what else he's hiding. Financial records, business dealings, property I might not know about. I want the complete picture before I decide what to do." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "This won't be cheap, and it won't be quick. Are you prepared for what we might find?" "I've spent 8 years being lied to," I replied. Nothing could be worse than not knowing the truth. I was wrong about that. Over the next 3 weeks, I maintained a perfect facade at home. I told James I was processing his proposal about the baby. I even agreed to meet with Stephanie to discuss the situation, a meeting he eagerly arranged. Meanwhile, Rachel's investigation was uncovering layers of deception that made the affairs seem almost trivial by comparison. James had been systematically hiding assets in a complex network of offshore accounts, tax havens in the Cayman Islands, shell companies in Panama, investment properties registered under aliases. He had been siphoning money not just from our marital assets, but from his family's company as well. "He's been embezzling," Rachel explained, spreading documents across her office table. "It looks like he's been skimming from client accounts for years, small enough amounts that it wouldn't trigger immediate alarms, but substantial over time." The numbers were staggering. Millions diverted from the family business, carefully concealed through creative accounting that would take forensic experts to fully unravel. Then came the revelation about the secret apartment in Back Bay, a luxury 3-bedroom that didn't appear in any of our financial records. Rachel's surveillance confirmed James used it for rendezvous with at least 3 different women, including Stephanie. Credit card statements revealed patterns of gifts, jewelry, designer handbags, weekend getaways for women whose names I'd never heard. "The deeper I dig, the worse it gets," Rachel warned during our 4th meeting. "Are you sure you want to continue?" I didn't hesitate. All of it. I need to know all of it. The most devastating discovery came a week later. Medical records Rachel obtained showed James had undergone a vasectomy 3 years earlier, right after our second failed IVF attempt. He had deliberately made himself sterile while watching me endure painful fertility treatments, hormone injections, and the emotional devastation of miscarriages. He knew we would never conceive, yet he let me believe it was unexplained infertility. "There's more," Rachel said gently, sliding a folder across the table. "DNA tests from the fertility clinic." I stared at the results, trying to process what I was seeing. The embryos created during our IVF procedures showed genetic inconsistencies. James had used a sperm donor without my knowledge or consent. "He didn't want biological children," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "He never did." "There's something else you should know," Rachel added. "Stephanie's pregnancy? The timing doesn't work with his vasectomy. Either she's lying about the paternity, or he's lying about the vasectomy," I finished. "But the medical records could be falsified if he has the right connections," Rachel explained. "Or he could have had it reversed without your knowledge." The possibility that James had deliberately chosen to have a child with another woman while preventing one with me was almost too painful to contemplate. But it aligned with another pattern. Rachel had uncovered secret meetings between James and his mother Eleanor, plotting ways to pressure me into giving up on having children. "They discussed your obsession with having a baby," Rachel told me, playing a recording from Eleanor's office. "Eleanor suggested finding ways to make you believe it was your choice to stop trying." I listened to my husband and mother-in-law discussing me as if I were a problem to be managed rather than a person with dreams and desires of my own. Their voices were clinical, calculating, discussing strategies to manipulate me into accepting childlessness or adoption. "She needs to accept that a Mitchell heir isn't in the cards," Eleanor's voice said clearly on the recording. "Your father is getting impatient about the succession plan." "I'm handling it," James replied. "The new strategy is working. She's almost ready to give up." Throughout this investigation, I maintained my role as the perfect, unsuspecting wife. I attended charity functions on James's arm, hosted a dinner party for his colleagues, even accompanied him to a fertility specialist appointment, all while gathering evidence that would eventually destroy him. James became increasingly attentive, mistaking my calm demeanor for acceptance. He brought Stephanie to our home for dinner, presenting us as a modern solution to an unfortunate situation. I smiled and asked appropriate questions about our pregnancy while secretly recording every word. "We'll make this work," James assured us both, reaching for my hand across the dining table. "The 3 of us can figure this out together." Stephanie seemed uncertain, watching me carefully for signs of anger or resentment. I offered only understanding and support, the perfect deceived wife willing to make the best of a bad situation. After she left, James kissed me with relief. "You're amazing," he whispered. "I don't deserve you." On that point, at least, we were in complete agreement. With a clear picture of James's deceptions, I began constructing my response. This wouldn't be a simple divorce, it would be a systematic dismantling of everything James valued. His reputation, his wealth, his family name, and his freedom. My first step was securing legal representation without James's knowledge. Diana Sawyer was the most formidable divorce attorney in Massachusetts, known for her ruthless efficiency and discretion. We met in a private room at the Boston Public Library, where I laid out everything Rachel had uncovered. "In 20 years of practice, I've never seen a case quite like this," Diana admitted, reviewing the evidence. The financial fraud alone would destroy him, but the medical deception— she shook her head. "A judge will crucify him." Together, we developed a strategy that would maximize my position while exposing James's crimes. Diana recommended waiting until we had irrefutable evidence of the business fraud before filing. "The Mitchell family has deep connections," she warned. "We need to be absolutely bulletproof." While Diana built the legal case, I created my own financial safety net. I opened accounts in my maiden name at banks where James had no connections. I liquidated jewelry and art pieces he had given me over the years, creating a cash reserve he couldn't trace or freeze. Through a former colleague, I secured a position at a financial firm in New York to begin whenever I was ready to leave Boston. The irony wasn't lost on me returning to the career James had pressured me to abandon. With skills that were now almost a decade outdated, I spent late nights secretly studying to update my knowledge, preparing for professional life after James. The most delicate part of my plan involved Stephanie. Our friendship had developed through our awkward situation, with James encouraging the connection. I carefully cultivated her trust, positioning myself as an unlikely ally rather than a rival. During our third lunch without James, Stephanie confessed her doubts. "Sometimes I wonder if he's playing us both," she admitted. "He makes promises, but nothing concrete ever materializes." I nodded sympathetically. "James can be elusive about commitments," I offered, subtly planting the first seed of doubt. Over subsequent meetings, I asked innocent questions that highlighted inconsistencies in James's stories to each of us. When Stephanie mentioned a weekend James claimed to be in Chicago for business, I accidentally referenced a client dinner he'd attended in Boston that same weekend. I watched her expression shift as she processed the contradiction. "I'm sure I misremembered," I quickly added, allowing her to draw her own conclusions. Meanwhile, Rachel had tracked down several other women from James's affairs. Most wanted nothing to do with the situation, but Lisa Palmer agreed to meet me. A marketing executive from New York, Lisa had been involved with James for nearly 4 years, overlapping almost entirely with our marriage. "He told me you two had an arrangement," Lisa explained during our coffee meeting, "that your marriage was essentially a business partnership, but you lived separate lives." The familiar story James had used the same narrative with multiple women. Each believed she was the exception, the one he truly loved. Through Lisa, I connected with Megan Torres, who had her own shocking story. 2 years earlier, James had presented her with a similar pregnancy opportunity after a supposedly accidental conception. When she'd actually become pregnant, James had pressured her into an abortion, then ghosted her completely. "I lost my baby and 6 months of my life to that man," Megan told me, tears in her eyes. "I don't want Stephanie to go through what I did." With this network of betrayed women, I pieced together a complete timeline of James's deceptions. The pattern was clear. James maintained multiple long-term relationships simultaneously, with each woman believing she was the only one or at least the special one. When complications arose, he would discard them and move on to the next. The final piece of my plan involved James's father, Robert. Though officially semi-retired, Robert maintained connections throughout Boston's business world. Through careful investigation, I discovered Robert had been pushed out of day-to-day operations at Mitchell Investments after questioning some of James's business practices. Our meeting took place at Robert's Boat Club, away from family eyes. I brought copies of the financial evidence Rachel had uncovered, showing him exactly how his son had been looting the family company. Robert's face aged 10 years as he reviewed the documents. I suspected something, he admitted quietly. But nothing of this magnitude. James and Eleanor have been working together, I explained. The company is being hollowed out from the inside. Robert nodded slowly. Eleanor always had blind spots where James was concerned. She convinced me I was being paranoid. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp despite his age. What do you need from me? When the time comes, I need you to be ready to take back control of the company, I replied. Not for me, for the clients who trust the Mitchell name. Robert agreed. More out of duty to the family legacy than any affection for me. With his support secured, I had allies on all fronts: legal, financial, personal, and professional. The final stage of my plan required the perfect setting. James had been pressing me to formalize our arrangement with Stephanie. He wanted to announce we would be adopting her baby at a dinner with his parents and key business associates. It's the perfect solution, he insisted. We'll present it as a modern family arrangement. No one needs to know the details. I suggested hosting the dinner at our home rather than a restaurant. It's more intimate, I explained. More appropriate for family news. James was delighted by my apparent acceptance. As I began planning the elaborate dinner party, making calls to caterers and florists, he grew increasingly affectionate, believing his manipulation had once again succeeded. I knew you'd understand eventually, he told me, kissing my forehead. You always come around to the right decision. Little did he know that the right decision I'd come to would destroy everything he had built on lies. If you've been following my story so far, I'd love to know. Have you ever had that moment where you realized someone's betrayal was far deeper than you initially thought? That shocking moment when you discover the lies were just the beginning? Let me know in the comments. And if you're wondering how I executed my revenge against a man who thought he was untouchable, stay with me, because the next part of my story shows exactly how the mighty can fall. The network of women James had deceived became my most unexpected source of strength. We formed a strange sisterhood, women from different backgrounds, different professions, all manipulated by the same man in surprisingly similar ways. Lisa Palmer, the marketing executive, provided insights into James's business connections outside Boston. He leveraged client relationships for personal gain, she explained during one of our meetings. He'd mention investment opportunities that never appeared in official company materials. Megan Torres shared text messages showing James's pattern of lies. The messages to her mirrored almost exactly what he had told me during our fertility struggles. The same phrases, the same promises, even the same apologies. It's like he has a script, Megan observed, comparing her messages with screenshots I shared. The same words for each situation. 3 other women eventually joined our coalition. Vanessa Reeves, a flight attendant James met on regular business trips. Rebecca Chen, a pharmaceutical executive whose company did business with Mitchell Investments. And Danielle Wright, a recent college graduate who had interned at the firm. Each had a piece of the puzzle, and together we created a complete picture of James's double life. He told me his wife was mentally unstable, Danielle admitted, unable to meet my eyes. That you were obsessed with having a baby and refused to accept medical reality. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I believed his lies too, I assured her. For much longer than you did. Building trust with these women wasn't easy. Initially, there was suspicion, resentment, even hostility. But our shared experience of betrayal gradually forged a powerful bond. We weren't just victims comparing notes, we were strategists pooling resources to ensure James faced consequences for his actions. Stephanie remained the most complicated relationship. As her pregnancy progressed, her doubts about James multiplied. During our shopping trip for nursery furniture, an excursion that would have seemed unimaginable months earlier, she confessed her growing uncertainty. He keeps delaying decisions about the baby's future, she said, as we browsed cribs. First, he wanted to be fully involved. Then he suggested you, and he raised the baby. Now he's talking about financial support but limited contact. She looked at me directly. What does he really want, Amelia? I chose my words carefully. I think James wants whatever seems most convenient at any given moment, I replied. He tells people what they want to hear. Stephanie nodded slowly. I'm starting to see that. She rested her hand on her growing belly. This baby deserves better. I felt a pang of genuine empathy. Stephanie had been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had been, but her situation carried lifelong consequences. The moral complexity of using her as part of my revenge plan troubled me. Was I any better than James if I manipulated her for my purposes? This ethical dilemma led to my most difficult decision, telling Stephanie the truth, even though it might derail my carefully constructed plan. Over lunch at a quiet cafe, I shared evidence of James's vasectomy and his pattern of deception with other women. I expected anger, denial, even accusations that I was lying out of jealousy. Instead, Stephanie went very still, her face draining of color. The timing never made sense, she finally said. The weekend he claims we conceived. We were careful. I told him it was my fertile period. She looked up, her eyes suddenly sharp. He insisted on not using protection. He said he wanted to take the risk. The implication was clear: if James had a vasectomy, as the records indicated, he knew there was no risk. Either Stephanie was pregnant by someone else, or James had deliberately reversed his vasectomy to have a child with her while preventing one with me. I want a paternity test, Stephanie decided, before the baby is born. Her determination to uncover the truth made her a powerful ally rather than a pawn in my revenge. It also meant I needed to accelerate my timeline before she confronted James directly. Beyond the women in James's life, I found unlikely support from the household staff who had witnessed his behavior over years. Maria, our housekeeper for 6 years, provided access to areas of our home I hadn't known existed, including a hidden safe in James's office containing additional financial records and a second passport under an alias. He is not a good man, Mrs. Mitchell, Maria told me as she handed over a key she'd secretly duplicated years earlier. The way he speaks when you are not home. No wife should be spoken of this way. James's driver, Henry, confirmed the pattern of affairs, providing detailed information about locations, timing, and the women James met when supposedly working late. He has regular appointments at the Four Seasons every Tuesday and the Mandarin Oriental on Thursdays, Henry explained. Different women, but the same schedule for over 2 years. Perhaps most surprisingly, Eleanor's personal assistant Judith became an invaluable source of information. Having worked for the Mitchell family for decades, Judith had gradually become disillusioned with their treatment of employees and business associates. Mrs. Mitchell Sr. instructed me to send flowers to your doctor after each failed IVF treatment, Judith revealed during our clandestine meeting at a bookstore cafe. She kept a calendar of your fertility treatments and scheduled family events to create maximum stress during your cycle. The deliberate sabotage of my fertility treatments was almost too cruel to comprehend. Judith provided emails showing Eleanor and James discussing ways to help Amelia accept her childlessness gracefully, a phrase that appeared repeatedly in their correspondence. They determined you weren't suitable to raise a Mitchell heir, Judith explained, but they needed you for social appearances. Through Judith, I gained access to Mitchell family financial records. Eleanor had kept hidden even from company accountants documents showing systematic tax evasion going back decades. The Mitchell fortune, it seemed, was built on fraud as much as financial acumen. As my network of allies grew, I reconnected with people James had systematically isolated me from: my sister Catherine, who had warned me about James after our engagement, my former colleagues from the financial firm where I'd started my career, college friends who had gradually been excluded from our social circle. Catherine was stunned by the evidence I'd gathered. I knew he was controlling, but this is sociopathic, she said as we reconnected over dinner at her home outside the city. How did none of us see it? He was careful, I explained. The isolation happened so gradually I barely noticed it myself. My sister became my emotional anchor during the investigation. When the weight of James's betrayal threatened to overwhelm me, Catherine provided perspective and reminded me of who I had been before him: ambitious, independent, strong. He didn't break you, she insisted during a moment of doubt. He just made you forget your own power for a while. With this network of support, the betrayed women, household staff, family members, and professional allies, I prepared for the final phase of my plan. Each person provided a piece of the puzzle that would eventually destroy James's carefully constructed facade. The most difficult part was maintaining my performance as the compliant wife while finalizing my preparations. Each morning I kissed James goodbye. Each evening I listened to his stories about his day, knowing that every word was likely a lie. I attended social functions on his arm, smiling at people who had no idea what was happening beneath the surface. James mistook my calm for acceptance, never suspecting that I was documenting his every move, recording his conversations, and preparing to dismantle his entire life. His confidence grew as the date of our dinner party approached the event where he planned to announce our modern family arrangement with Stephanie. "You've been amazing through all of this," he told me the night before our dinner, pulling me close in bed. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." I smiled in the darkness, thinking of all the evidence hidden in a secure location, the allies positioned throughout his life, and the trap that was about to spring shut. "You got exactly what you deserve," I whispered, and for once, I was telling him the absolute truth. The day of the dinner party arrived with perfect autumn weather, clear skies, crisp air, and vibrant foliage visible from our townhouse windows. I spent the morning overseeing final preparations, directing caterers and florists with the precision of a military commander. James noticed my attention to detail with approval. "You've really embraced this," he commented as I arranged place cards at our dining table. "I was worried you might still have reservations." "I want everything to be perfect," I replied truthfully, though not for the reasons he assumed. Our guest list included the core Mitchell family, James's parents, Robert and Eleanor, his younger brother, Michael, and his wife, along with 3 of James's most important business associates and their spouses. Stephanie would arrive separately, halfway through cocktails, for the carefully choreographed announcement. Eleanor arrived first, inspecting the arrangements with her critical eye. "Peonies in October?" she murmured, touching one of the flower arrangements. "How unconventional." "I have many unconventional ideas these days," I responded with a smile that made her pause. Robert arrived minutes later, giving me a subtle nod of confirmation. He had spent the week quietly meeting with the company's board members, preparing them for what would happen tonight. The business associates arrived next. Harrison Wells, the firm's largest client, Bernard Cabot, who had been James's mentor, and Thomas Blackwell, whose family had invested with the Mitchells for generations. Each brought their wives, all of whom had socialized with me at countless charity events while having no idea of the turmoil beneath my perfect surface. By 7:30, everyone except Stephanie had arrived. James circulated confidently among the guests, refreshing drinks and sharing insider jokes. He appeared completely at ease, a man in total control of his domain. I watched him charm Mrs. Blackwell with practiced attention, noting how he maintained just the right amount of eye contact to seem interested without crossing professional boundaries. When the doorbell rang at 7:45, James caught my eye across the room. The moment had arrived. He excused himself to answer the door personally, returning with Stephanie on his arm. Her baby bump was visible beneath her navy blue dress, though not prominent enough to draw immediate attention. A momentary hush fell over the gathering as guests processed this unexpected addition. Eleanor's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. "Everyone," James announced with practiced ease, "you remember Stephanie Clark? She'll be joining us for this special evening." Polite greetings followed, though I noted the confused glances exchanged among the guests. Eleanor recovered quickly, moving to intercept Stephanie with a tight smile. I observed their interaction from across the room, noting how Eleanor's gaze repeatedly dropped to Stephanie's abdomen. The caterers announced dinner was ready, and we moved to the dining room. I had arranged the seating strategically, James at the head of the table, me at the foot, with Stephanie placed directly opposite Robert. Eleanor sat to James's right, with the business associates distributed among family members. The first 2 courses proceeded smoothly, with conversation flowing around business developments and social events. James grew increasingly animated, clearly building toward his announcement. As the main course was served, he clinked his glass for attention. "I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight," he began, his practiced charm on full display. "Amelia and I invited you because you're the most important people in our lives, and we have something significant to share." He reached for my hand across the length of the table. I allowed him to take it, maintaining my serene expression. "As many of you know, Amelia and I have struggled with fertility issues for years, he continued. It's been a difficult journey with many disappointments. But sometimes, life presents unexpected solutions. He gestured toward Stephanie, who shifted uncomfortably under the sudden attention. Stephanie is expecting a child in February, James announced. And after much discussion, we've made an extraordinary decision. Amelia and I will be raising this child as our own. Gasps and confused murmurs rippled around the table. Eleanor's face remained frozen in a social smile, though her knuckles whitened around her fork. I know this is unconventional, James continued, but we believe family can take many forms. This arrangement gives the child a stable, loving home while allowing Stephanie to pursue her career without the constraints of single motherhood. He raised his glass. To modern families and new beginnings. The guests hesitantly lifted their glasses, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their host. Before anyone could drink, I gently set my glass down, the soft clink drawing all eyes to me. Before we toast, I said, my voice calm and measured, I'd like to add some context to James's announcement. James's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't part of our rehearsed script. James is right that we've struggled with fertility for years, I began. What he hasn't mentioned is why those struggles were so persistent. I opened a folder I'd placed beside my seat earlier, removing a medical document and sliding it to Harrison Wells, who sat nearest to me. 3 years ago, without my knowledge or consent, James underwent a vasectomy, I stated, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. He continued to participate in fertility treatments with me, knowing conception was impossible. He watched me endure hormonal treatments, painful procedures, and the heartbreak of failures and miscarriages, all while knowing he had deliberately made himself sterile. Harrison's eyes widened as he scanned the document before passing it to his wife. The paper made its way around the table as I continued. James, would you like to explain to our guests why you would put your wife through years of fertility treatments, knowing they could never succeed? I asked pleasantly, as if inquiring about his preference for dessert. James's face flushed. Amelia? This isn't the time. It's exactly the time, I interrupted, removing more documents from my folder. While we're discussing family planning, perhaps you could also explain why the embryos created during our IVF procedures show genetic inconsistencies suggesting donor sperm was used without my knowledge or consent. Eleanor gasped audibly. Robert's expression remained grim, but unsurprised he had already seen this evidence. These are private medical matters, James attempted, looking to his business associates for support. Finding none, he turned to Eleanor. Mother, perhaps we should— Your mother knew about the vasectomy, I continued, distributing more documents around the table. In fact, she helped arrange it. They've been conspiring for years to prevent a Mitchell heir from my supposedly inferior genetic line while maintaining the social appearance of a proper dynastic marriage. Eleanor's face contorted with fury. How dare you? I dare because I have proof, I cut her off, nodding to Robert, who produced his own file of documents. Evidence your husband has already reviewed and verified. The dinner party had transformed into something resembling a board meeting or deposition. The guests sat frozen, wine glasses untouched, as I systematically presented evidence of James and Eleanor's deception. Stephanie, who had remained silent until now, turned to James. Is this true? You had a vasectomy? James attempted damage control. It's complicated. Medical records can be— Then explain this, I interrupted, producing financial records that detailed offshore accounts, embezzled client funds, and tax evasion schemes. While manipulating me personally, James has been systematically looting the Mitchell family business. I turned to the business associates. Mr. Wells, your family's trust has been particularly targeted. Over $3 million diverted from your accounts in the past 5 years alone. Harrison Wells's face drained of color as he examined the documents I provided. This can't be right, he muttered, though his expression suggested he recognized the transactions. I assure you it is, Robert finally spoke, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension. I've spent the past 2 weeks verifying these records. The fraud is extensive and spans nearly a decade. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is absurd. These allegations are— Not allegations, I corrected calmly. Evidence. Evidence that has already been provided to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the Massachusetts State Attorney's Office. The calculated revelation of James's crimes continued for nearly an hour. With each new piece of evidence, his attempts at denial became weaker. The guests sat in stunned silence as I methodically exposed every aspect of his deception, personal, financial, and professional. When I finally revealed the recordings of James and Eleanor discussing how to manipulate me into giving up on having children, even Eleanor's most steadfast supporters at the table looked at her with disgust. "I think we've heard enough," Bernard Cabot said finally, standing to leave. "James, expect a call from my attorneys in the morning. My family will be withdrawing all investments from Mitchell Investments immediately." The other business associates followed suit, making hurried exits with shocked expressions and whispered apologies to Robert. Eleanor remained frozen in her seat, her social mask completely shattered. Stephanie was the last guest to leave. At the door, she turned to James. "I've scheduled a paternity test for next week," she informed him coldly. "Though after tonight, I'm not sure I want this child to have any connection to the Mitchell name." As the door closed behind her, James turned to me with a combination of fury and desperation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he hissed. "You've destroyed everything." I smiled for the first time that evening, a genuine expression rather than the social mask I'd worn for years. "Yes," I agreed calmly. That was precisely the point. The aftermath of the dinner party unfolded with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. By 9 the next morning, Mitchell Investments board members had called an emergency meeting. By noon, James had been suspended pending investigation. By the end of the week, the SEC had frozen the company's major accounts and James's personal assets. James's initial response was a desperate attempt to discredit me. He told anyone who would listen that I was unstable, vindictive, fabricating evidence out of jealousy over his relationship with Stephanie. His narrative quickly collapsed when Stephanie publicly confirmed she had obtained a paternity test that proved conclusively that James was not the father of her child. I was manipulated just as thoroughly as Amelia was, she told a close friend who worked at the Boston Globe. The resulting article, Mitchell Heirs' Web of Lies, A Dynasty's Downfall, appeared on the front page of the Sunday edition, complete with statements from multiple women describing similar patterns of deception. Diana filed our divorce papers the Monday after the dinner party. Given the overwhelming evidence of James's misconduct, she pursued the most aggressive strategy possible, demanding not just an equitable division of assets, but punitive damages for the years of emotional abuse and medical fraud. "He used your body as a laboratory for fertility experiments without informed consent," Diana argued in her filing. The psychological torture of forcing his wife to undergo painful medical procedures he knew would fail constitutes a level of cruelty that demands extraordinary compensation. The Mitchell family's attempts to close ranks around James quickly disintegrated as the financial implications became clear. The SEC investigation revealed that the embezzlement went beyond what even I had discovered, with client funds misappropriated across dozens of accounts. Robert, true to his word, took control of the company, forcing Eleanor to step down from her position on the board. In a private moment at the lawyer's office, he thanked me for exposing the corruption before it destroyed the entire firm. "I suspected for years," he admitted, "but I allowed Eleanor to convince me I was being paranoid. I failed the company. And I failed you as well." Eleanor's social downfall was perhaps the most dramatic aspect of the aftermath. The woman who had ruled Boston society for decades suddenly found herself excluded from charity boards and uninvited from events. Her carefully cultivated image as the matriarch of a model family shattered irreparably when recordings of her discussing me in coldly calculating terms became public. "We always knew she wasn't Mitchell material," Eleanor's voice said clearly on the recording played during a divorce deposition. "But she served her purpose for a while. The other women from James's life handled the public scandal with remarkable dignity." Lisa Palmer gave a single interview to a business publication, focusing on the financial fraud rather than the personal betrayal. Megan Torres started a support group for women who had been manipulated by partners during pregnancy. Each found their own way to reclaim their narrative from James's deceptions. My own journey through this period was complex. There was vindication in watching James's carefully constructed life implode, but also grief for the years lost to his manipulation. I began therapy to process the medical trauma and psychological abuse I had endured, working to disentangle my sense of self from the identity James had constructed for me. The forensic accounting revealed the true extent of James's wealth, significantly more than I had been led to believe during our marriage. Beyond his salary at the family firm, he had built a network of side investments and hidden accounts totaling over $12 million. The court froze these assets pending the divorce settlement, preventing James from accessing funds for his mounting legal defense. Criminal charges followed the civil proceedings. The district attorney's office pursued charges of wire, fraud, tax evasion, and financial elder abuse, the latter stemming from James's misappropriation of funds from elderly clients. The evidence was so overwhelming that James's attorneys began negotiating a plea deal within months. Throughout this period, I maintained a dignified silence in public. I declined interview requests and avoided social media, focusing instead on rebuilding my life away from the Mitchell name and influence. The women who had been similarly victimized by James became unexpected friends and allies, our shared experience creating bonds that transcended conventional relationships. Stephanie's situation resolved in an unexpected way. The father of her child turned out to be her long-term boyfriend, who had been unaware of her relationship with James. After the initial shock and betrayal, they reconciled and began building a life together, away from the Mitchell drama. In a twisted way, I'm grateful, Stephanie told me during our last meeting. If James hadn't manipulated both of us, I might never have found the courage to be honest with Mark about what I really wanted. James's reputation didn't merely suffer, it was systematically obliterated. Former friends and business associates distanced themselves, claiming they had always had suspicions about his character. His membership was revoked at the exclusive clubs that had once welcomed him as royalty. Even casual acquaintances avoided association with the Mitchell scandal. The psychological impact on James was evident in his rare public appearances. The confident, charismatic man who had controlled rooms with his presence became hunched, defensive, constantly looking over his shoulder. His attempts to rebuild connections were rebuffed at every turn. He called me last week, Bernard Cabot told me when we encountered each other at a charity event 6 months later, wanted to explain his side of the story, as if there could be an explanation for what he did to his clients. To you, perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the fallout was watching the Mitchell family reckon with its legacy. Robert's return to leadership meant a complete overhaul of the company's practices, with transparent accounting and ethical investment strategies replacing the culture of secrecy and privilege that had defined the firm under James and Eleanor's influence. As the divorce proceedings moved toward conclusion, I found myself increasingly detached from the outcome. The vindication I had sought had been achieved not just through financial penalties, but through the complete dismantling of James's carefully constructed facade. He had lost what he valued most: his reputation, his social standing, and his family legacy. 1 year after the fateful dinner party, I received notification that our divorce had been finalized. The settlement was substantial beyond even what Diana had initially sought, but the true victory lay in reclaiming my sense of self from the person James had methodically attempted to erase. Exactly 1 year and 3 months after the dinner party that changed everything, I stood in my new apartment overlooking Central Park, watching snow fall gently on the trees below. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, with a settlement that ensured my financial independence for life. But money had never been my primary motivation. The true victory lay in justice not just for me, but for everyone James had harmed through his systematic deceptions. The criminal proceedings against him had concluded with a plea deal: 8 years in federal prison for financial crimes, with additional restitution payments to defrauded clients. The man who had once commanded Boston's social scene now wore a prison uniform, his daily routine dictated by guards rather than his own whims. Eleanor hadn't escaped consequences either. Though she avoided criminal charges, the social ostracization she experienced proved perhaps more devastating to a woman who had built her identity around status and influence. Her invitations to charity boards dried up. Her calls went unreturned. The carefully cultivated image of Mitchell family perfection had been irreparably shattered. My own life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days of investigation. I had returned to my financial career with a position at Goldman Sachs, where my personal experience with fraud detection had proven unexpectedly valuable. The skills I had honed unraveling James's deceptions translated perfectly to identifying financial irregularities in complex investment structures. "You have an unusual ability to spot patterns others miss," my new boss commented during my 6-month review. "It's like you can sense when something doesn't add up." Beyond my professional renaissance, I had founded a nonprofit organization called Clear Sight, providing resources and support for people leaving manipulative relationships. The women from James's web of deception became the organization's first board members, each bringing unique perspectives and strengths. Lisa Palmer handled our financial structure, ensuring transparency and accountability. Megan Torres developed programs specifically for women dealing with reproductive coercion and pregnancy-related manipulation. Even Stephanie contributed occasional guidance, having completed her own journey to clarity and independence. The most unexpected outcome had been the genuine friendships that emerged from shared trauma. Women who should have been rivals by conventional standards instead formed a powerful support network, helping each other rebuild lives that had been distorted by the same man's influence. "We should have been enemies according to his script," Lisa remarked during one of our monthly dinners. "Instead, we became each other's strongest allies." My relationship with my family had also undergone profound healing. Catherine and I spoke almost daily, rebuilding the closeness James had systematically undermined. My parents, who had gradually been excluded from my life through James's subtle manipulations, became regular visitors to my new home. The distance James had created between us dissolved as I reconnected with my authentic self. "It's like having our daughter back," my mother said during their first visit to my New York apartment. "For years, you were there physically, but something essential was missing." Robert Mitchell remained an unexpected ally throughout the transition. Having reclaimed control of the family company, he implemented sweeping reforms to restore its ethical foundation and client trust. We maintained a respectful relationship, communicating occasionally about the ongoing restoration of funds to defrauded clients. "You saved the firm," he told me during our last meeting. "If you hadn't exposed James when you did, there might have been nothing left to salvage." Eleanor never contacted me directly after the divorce, but I occasionally heard about her through mutual acquaintances. She had retreated to the Mitchell family's summer home in Maine, rarely appearing in Boston society anymore. Her carefully constructed world had collapsed along with her son's deceptions. The psychological healing took longer than the practical rebuilding. Therapy helped me process not just the betrayal, but the systematic erasure of my identity that had occurred over years. I had to rediscover who Amelia Harrison was separate from the carefully controlled Mrs. Mitchell I had become. "The most insidious aspect of prolonged psychological manipulation," my therapist explained, "is how it makes you doubt your own perceptions. Reclaiming your reality is the first step toward reclaiming yourself." That reclamation included reconnecting with interests and passions James had subtly discouraged: my love of classical piano, my interest in modern art, my preference for intimate gatherings over grand social events. Each rediscovered aspect of my authentic self felt like reclaiming territory that had been colonized by his influence. 18 months after the dinner party, I experienced a chance encounter that crystallized how far I had come. While attending a financial conference in Boston, I spotted James's brother Michael across the hotel lobby. We made eye contact briefly before he approached, hesitation evident in his expression. "Amelia," he greeted me awkwardly. "You look well." "Thank you, Michael," I replied calmly. "I am well." He shifted uncomfortably. "James is eligible for parole next year. He's changed, according to my mother." I nodded, feeling nothing but a distant sadness for the years I had lost. "I hope he has, for his own sake." "Do you ever?" Michael began, then stopped himself. "Never mind. It's good to see you thriving." As he walked away, I realized the encounter had produced none of the anxiety or anger I might have expected. James Mitchell no longer held power over my emotions or my future. The revenge I had so meticulously planned had served its purpose not just in bringing justice, but in freeing me completely from his influence. That evening, I stood on my hotel balcony overlooking Boston Harbor, the city lights reflecting on the water. The woman who had once been defined by her role as James Mitchell's wife now stood confidently in her own identity, professional, independent, and finally free to define her own story. The true revenge wasn't in destroying what James valued most. It was in reclaiming what he had tried to take from me, my agency, my identity, my future. By methodically dismantling the cage he had built around me, I had not only exposed his deceptions but had liberated myself from their lingering effects. Life after revenge, I discovered, wasn't about looking backward at what had been done to me, but forward to what I could now create for myself. The energy once devoted to uncovering James's lies was now channeled into building something authentic and meaningful, a life defined by my own choices rather than someone else's manipulations. 2 years to the day after the fateful dinner at Ciel, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a handwritten note from Stephanie and a small photograph of her daughter, now a year old. "Thank you for helping me see clearly," the note read simply. "Some betrayals lead to unexpected gifts." Looking at the happy child who had inadvertently triggered the collapse of James's house of cards, I felt a sense of completion. The cycle of deception had been broken. The truth, painful as it had been, had ultimately set us all free. As I sit here writing this account of my journey through betrayal and recovery, I'm struck by how the quest for revenge transformed into something far more valuable, a reclamation of self and purpose. The woman who once defined herself through her husband's expectations now recognizes her own strength, wisdom, and resilience. The path forward isn't defined by what was done to me, but by what I choose to create from the lessons learned along the way. And that, perhaps, is the most satisfying revenge of all. If my story has resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with betrayal and recovery. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after discovering someone wasn't who they claimed to be? What helped you find strength during those difficult times? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear that there is life, beautiful, authentic life after betrayal. Thank you for witnessing my story. And remember, the best revenge isn't just about making someone else lose everything. It's about reclaiming everything that truly matters to you.